We're back with NYU Law Professor Melissa Murray and former U.S. Attorney for Georgia, Michael J. Moore. We've been walking through some of these new revelations coming out of the January 6th probe. And Professor Murray, what does it tell you that several members of Congress reportedly were interested in getting pardons for themselves?
Well, duh. This was a coup. Of course, it was criminal activity. And they clearly knew that there was at least something afoot that would require a pardon. So the fact that you're requesting a pardon suggests, as you said, that you've done something that requires a pardon. And so the idea that this was ordinary lawmaking, the ordinary course of these individuals' roles as representatives of their constituents, they know that this wasn't the case. If you're asking for a pardon, you've done something that's gone beyond the pale.
Yeah, and Michael, this may seem very lawyerly that three lawyers here on the screen are discussing the mental state. But as anyone who's watched Law & Order or my cousin Vinny knows, what's in your mind or what you intend matters. And yes, right. if you have a criminal mindset, you might try to lie about it and cover it up, but that's what trials do. They try to get to it. A car accident is very different than trying to murder someone with your car, but both involve some of the same physicality. And so it seems rather important here, both in Georgia, where you're an expert, and in the committee's work, which overlaps with the DOJ probe, that people thought this way. And so I go to Exhibit B, Mr. Moore, which you can speak on both the members of Congress and the other person who thought a pardon might be needed, which was Kevin McCarthy, who took it as a given in secret that Donald Trump would be searching for a pardon because he was such an obvious election criminal. Take a listen.
Now, I haven't had a discussion with the Dems that if he did resign, would it not happen? Now, this is one personal fear I have. I do not want to get into any conversations about Pence pardoning.
What does all this tell you as a prosecutor and investigator, Mr. Moore, about the mindset of those members of the Republican House who, again, I want to emphasize, were sympathetic to the goal of keeping Trump in office and sympathetic to Donald Trump, but who privately thought there was a lot of crime going on?
Well, I think your analysis is exactly right in that they knew what they were doing was wrong, and they just took the position that the end justified the means. And so they would seek a pardon, or they would discuss a pardon, or they would try to figure out how to do it as long as they could somehow preserve Trump in office. This is just another tape from McCarthy. I mean, you probably have something else where he said something totally opposite, and he'll change his story on that. So you really can't put much stock in his position on the pardon. But it does tell something about his state of mind. And we talk. You mentioned the idea of intent. We have to prove intent in a criminal case. You have to have this mens rea, they call it, for the non-lawyers out there, the stuff they grill you on in your first year of law school. And what it says is you look at somebody's state of mind and decide that they actually intend to do what they're being charged with doing. And if you want to make it sort of a simple analogy, think about the difference between somebody who maybe kills somebody in a fight and the idea that it was premeditated. That somebody actually have the consciousness to think about it and to plan it and to scope out the location and to do those things. And these texts and the discussion we've been having sort of indicate that that's exactly what happened. They knew that this was wrong. They knew that it was going to be a violation of law, so much so that they discussed ways to sort of clean up the mess they were going to make as long as they could keep their king on the throne.
Professor?
I think that's exactly right. The real question here for any crime is what's the mental state of the individual at the time that they're undertaking the activity. And here it seems not only was this premeditated, not only did they have some understanding that what they were doing was beyond the pale, would constitute a coup under any other circumstances, they tried to make provisions to ensure that they would not be on the hook afterwards.
Mr. Moore, turning to Georgia, where I mentioned they've impaneled this grand jury, if somebody's watching and they say, well, I feel like I've heard this one before, there's another probe into something Donald Trump did, there's a lot of noise about following the facts and the law. In New York, they had a couple DA candidates who all said pretty similar stuff, and then they went forward with that probe and shut it down. They do have open cases against other people, high people in the Trump org, but not Donald Trump. What do you say to someone who looks at this and says, why should they even follow this, or is this going anywhere? Or do you see the impaneling of this grand jury, combined with the audio tape and the blatant effort to steal the votes of Georgia citizens, to sort of cancel out 11,000 of them, kind of a massive voter fraud if it had been achieved. You see this as somehow something that could lead to trouble for Donald Trump?
I think this has taken an extraordinarily long time, and there was a fairly clean case and a very targeted case that could be made with the idea that you charge the former president based on the phone call alone. And so now we've gotten into this morass of, we've got the primaries coming up in Georgia. There's going to have to be a delay in witness testimony so that the investigation does not look too political. And at the end of the day, if you're looking at this and you're wondering what's going to happen, I'll tell you, this is the start gun at the beginning of the race, because there's nothing that's going to be decided by this investigative grand jury. All these folks are going to do is hear some evidence. They'll be able to subpoena some witnesses, look at some documents, and at the end of the day, make a report. They cannot issue an indictment. If they make a report in favor of an indictment, or if they don't, at some point, the district attorney will make a decision whether or not she wants to move forward. Even then, and I think really probably come the end of this month when we start seeing witnesses and the issue of subpoenas coming out, I think you're likely to see some of the same defense tactics that we've seen in other cases around the country involving Trump and the organization. You'll see people asserting executive privilege. You'll see people asserting presidential immunity, whether or not there ought to be service of the subpoena, whether or not they have to honor the subpoena in Georgia. And at the end of the day, you also may see an effort to transfer the case to the federal court, or remove the case, as we call it, to the federal court, because he was a federal officer. And
so I'm running right up against our time limit, but sounds like, although we're not doing predictions here, it sounds like you don't think they're taking the most aggressive or assertive stance they could down there.
Yeah, I mean, I don't like to second guess the prosecutor. I think she's doing the best job she thinks she ought to be doing, and she may have evidence that I've not seen clearly. But
well, you don't like to do it, but you don't like to do it, but you're low key doing it.
Well, I like to have. I think this could have been something that was done as a very targeted approach. I think that would have brought this matter to a head fairly quickly, and we could move on. This tells me that she's looking at expanding the investigation. Maybe she's not just trying to catch the spider, but she's trying to look for other people she can get in the web. And so we'll see what happens after the investigative grand jury, whether or not there's an indictment. But this is just the beginning of the story. We're nowhere near the end of this thing.
I feel like there's a Charlotte's Web reference lurking somewhere here, but I haven't read it recently enough to do it.
Some pig, Ari. There's some pig.
There you go. That's why we book you guys. Finish it up.
Sure.
Professor Murray, Michael J. Moore, both of you rocking the kind of bookshelves we would expect of such learned individuals. Thanks for coming on The Beat.